So, welcome to the next episode of The Conversation. An hour spent trying to address difficult issues around race and racism in our community and indeed around the world. Grateful to have you with us for this episode and always joined by the wonderful, the dynamic, honorable one, Onjalé Scott Price as co-host. Hey, Angie, how you doing?
Hey Rev, always good to see you.
Right, likewise, likewise. So, listen, we have an incredible show, I think, lined up for our audience today. We're going to be looking at immigration and refugees. Obviously, a very timely topic. Lots of discussion recently about Afghan refugees, or what they prefer to be called, I guess, evacuees, and also what's happening at the southern border of our country. That's been going on for years now. And so we have an incredible panel set up for you today to get into that discussion. But first, we're going to hear from some people on the street who also have some very powerful things to say and will give us all quite a history lesson about where we've been in this country in dealing with immigration and refugees. So why don't we take a listen to what they have to say in response to a question that we pose to them, and that is, what effect does race and country of origin, what effect does race and country of origin have on U.S. immigration policy? That's our first question. Let's see what they have to say, and we'll be back then with our guests.
Well, the history of immigration in the United States is one of the dominant forces shaping our experience of race today. While immigration of white Europeans has, for the most part, led to a smooth welcome into our society, immigrants who are people of color face a more difficult path to acceptance, much less belonging in our nation. So near the end of the 1800s, the welcoming of Chinese immigrants to California abruptly stopped as fear grew that the Chinese immigrants were taking over jobs and posed a threat to society. So Congress passed several laws to exclude Chinese immigrants from the country and society. In 1924, Congress passed the National Origins Act, establishing a quota system to limit the number of immigrants entering the United States. In order to reduce the number of these less desirable Italian, Eastern European, or Jewish immigrants, the law deliberately based the new quotas on census data from 1890s, more than 20 years earlier, when the majority of immigrants in the United States were white Protestants from Northern and Western Europe. Subsequently, state and local governments, not only in the Southwest, but all across the country, conducted the Mexican repatriation efforts of 1930s with support and funding from the federal government. And finally, in the midst of the civil rights movement, Congress passed immigration legislation ending the old quota system in 1965. The Immigration and Naturalization Act, replaced the previous quota system with a preference system based on immigrants' family relationship with U.S. citizen or legal permanent residents, and to a lesser degree, to their skills. Despite the fact that the majority of visas are granted to family members of citizens and legal permanent residents, even those with family connections experience unreasonably wait times to immigrate to the United States. And I have to say that the pandemic has made these waiting times even longer. Immigrants from the four countries with the longest wait times, Mexico, India, China, and the Philippines, can face wait times for more than 20 years, depending on family relationships, employment status, and other factors.
Well, racism is certainly a stream that runs through all of immigration history, unfortunately. It's a reality, and I think we have to recognize that. And it goes, frankly, even broader than race. It goes to ethnicity, it goes to religion, it goes to gender, it goes to what I call the other or the stranger, things that we're not comfortable with. And I think there's this natural tendency to tilt in favor of the things and the people you're familiar with when you're crafting an immigration policy. And I think we have to do our best to certainly understand that that needs to be balanced against the needs of populations that are in many cases dire straits and need the protection that this country has been so good historically about offering.
Well, we are grateful for those very informative educational comments from our guests there on the street. And we want to now hear what our panelists have to say in response to to the question that is before us at the moment, which is, what effect does race and country of origin play in U.S. immigration policy? And we are really fortunate to have with us two individuals with deep experience, long histories in working on immigration and refugee issues. I want to introduce, first of all, Chris George, who is the executive director of an organization called IRIS, which, if I remember correctly, stands for Integrated Refugee Immigration Services. And by way of full transparency, I had a chance to serve as an intern with that organization when I was in seminary at Yale Divinity School. So it's
very
one
cool.
with which I have some familiarity. And actually, our youngest son also spent some time working with that agency. So, Chris, welcome. Good to see you again. It's been a long time, but I know you continue to do good work in the immigration refugee field. So, what's your initial thought response to the question about the effect that country of origin has on our immigration policy?
So thanks, Will, and it's great to see you again. And you probably didn't think I would still be with Iris 16 years later, but I am. It's great work. I mean, it's not every day that you can get up and say, hey, I'm going to welcome persecuted people from all over the world and help them start new lives in this country. So it's very rewarding work. But when I think about the topic of race and immigration, or race and refugee resettlement, my thoughts go to the previous administration, which tried to pervert and destroy the essence of the refugee resettlement program, which is a humanitarian program to save the lives of people who've been persecuted, help the most vulnerable, the most who need to be resettled, bring them to the United States, and help them restart their lives. The previous administration actually ran a campaign to vilify refugees, and it seemed that the combination of racism and xenophobia was especially toxic. At one point, then President Trump said, why are we bringing people from these, I won't use the bad word, these S-hole countries in Africa? Why don't we bring more people from Norway? So my thought when we have this topic of race and immigration, or race and refugee resettlement, and my thought is we need to make sure this never happens again, or we have a president, an administration that can have such an enormous impact on what might be one of our finest, most noble, oldest traditions of welcoming people who've been persecuted to this country. We need to democratize the refugee resettlement program, especially the decision making. And we need to make sure that those who are making those decisions are more representative of this country, are more diverse. So those are my initial thoughts. It really goes to kind of process. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. And first of all, I'm glad you're still at IRIS 16 years later, and the fact that you're still there affirms that when I served on the committee that called you, selected you to be the executive director, we did a really good job. So I'm glad you're still there. Yeah.
That's very kind of you to say that. So I have you to blame on my bad days.
That's why I'm here. Okay, that's why I'm here. So yeah, I think the way you summed it up, as you were sharing about the previous administration, and I was like, well, that sort of crystallizes it right there. That's like, boom. Why do we have people from these S-hole countries? Why don't we have more people from Norway coming? I was like, that's what this show is about today. That's it in a nutshell, right? So Helen, let me bring you into the conversation here. Helen is someone I don't know as long as Chris, less than a year. I've known Helen, but she's come into Falmouth and jumped in feet first, especially in helping to deal with refugees and evacuees and immigrants into this community. So, and I know, Helen, you have a background in having worked with Catholic Charities in their refugee resettlement program, and with the Center for New Americans and Interfaith Works of Central New York. So you've been at this for some time. So give us your initial thoughts as we welcome you to the conversation.
Absolutely. And I thank Chris for the things he said, because they're right on, but that was the piece that I was going to get to if I had time, because I want to start about 16 years back. Ironically, that's been about my stretch in the refugee resettlement world too. And maybe further than that, because refugee resettlement started here basically around the time of the Second World War and dealing with the Holocaust. Those were the primary first times this country all but belatedly opened their arms in welcome. And the history of refugee resettlement started out as largely faith-based communities, and all faiths got on board, helping to welcome and to resettle people who had been traumatized, people whose lives were at risk, and people who were basically homeless by loss of country or loss of permission to be in that country. And it was an incredible partnership, and gradually government became a partner. They started out as about a 5% financial partner. Frankly, they ended up being a larger share than that. But it was always, and I think Chris would affirm this as well, until the last administration, this was a bipartisan humanitarian commitment on the part of the American people. And somehow that's gotten shipwrecked. And I know that we have brought many people of many colors and many faiths to this country. And my perhaps naive belief is, for a long time, racism as such was very much kept at bay, and our higher and better selves and better aspirations, better goals, and humanitarian efforts took the lead in the refugee resettlement world and in immigration work. Groups such as the Cubans who came as a special category. They weren't actually refugees. They were humanitarian parolees, but given permanent status. And the Haitians, after the first earthquake, were given temporary parolee status that was never upgraded to permanent, which may have been a somewhat racist issue. It felt that way to me, but something has gotten lost in how our government has been given, if you will, at the executive level, too much power in something that has always belonged to all the people of this country in their highest and best moments.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Yeah, I've got so many thoughts running through my mind right now. I want to follow up with Chris and you on, but let me bring our co-host and co-producer of the conversation into this conversation, Onjalé Scott Price. Onjalé, what are your thoughts, or what questions do you have initially for our guests?
Well, I think our guests have a lot more experience and history than I have. So I am really looking forward to hearing what they have to say, because I don't know a lot about this topic. I attended a university, Embry-Riddle, in Florida that was very diverse. We represented almost every country on earth. So I had friends from all over, and hearing their experiences with trying to get green cards and trying to get permanent status after finishing their degree, quite a few people I know, it was difficult, but I didn't recognize how difficult it was in general. And then when I think about the differences between the friends who I have who are Black and brown, who came from Ghana, Nigeria, and Barbados, and how much longer it's taken them to get their status than some people I know who came from Germany, it does make me wonder, what is that? Like, why is that? But I also know, I recognize that most getting green cards and getting permanent residency status is very time consuming and can be very costly if people don't have the access. And so that becomes a barrier to the countries that don't have as much money, which generally can be the Black and brown countries. But I'd really like to pass it back to hear more from our guests, because I know that I always learn a lot when we do these shows, but I know I'm going to learn quite a bit today.
Yeah, thank you, Anjay. Let me maybe toss this question to our guests. It's something with which I've I don't know if wrestled, but thought about often, and I don't hear a lot of conversation in the public square about it. But there is this situation, and Angie was just talking about it, where it seems like if you are from a certain region of the world, certain part of the world, you get maybe preferential treatment, you get easier access, quicker access than if you are from other parts of the world. I think about when the war was going on in Bosnia, and there was an effort to bring in people as refugees from those war-torn countries. That process seemed to go without much resistance. I didn't hear much resistance from people in Congress or the political world to that. And yet we look at something like what's happening at our southern border, where people are climate refugees or refugees from the climate crisis and other terror in their lives. It seems as though every roadblock in the world is put up to keep those brown and Black folks from being able to come into the country. So, Chris, I'm going to toss it back to you. Am I onto something there, or what do you think?
No, I think you definitely are. I don't think any sensible person can say that race does not play a part in our immigration policies and immigration decisions. It is a factor in public sentiment, and it is a factor in political decision making. And if you look at the southern border, just recently, the treatment of dark-skinned Haitians was just an abomination. Border guards on horseback, using whips to control people. It just immediately horrified us and conjured up, the history of brutality and slavery in this country. I don't think lighter skinned people would have been treated that way. You're absolutely right. At the southern border, many of the people who are trying to get into the United States have legitimate claims for refugee status. When the claim is made in the United States, it's called applying for asylum. And they are not given the opportunity to make that claim, to state their case. And that really goes against US law and a long tradition in this country. Whenever anybody enters the country, no matter how they entered, even if they entered, without passing through inspection points, swimming across a river, or being smuggled into the country, it doesn't matter. When they're there and they present themselves to border guards and they say, I want to apply for asylum, they have to be given an opportunity to make their case, to tell an authority that they are fleeing persecution, that they meet that international law definition of a refugee, someone who is fleeing persecution in their home country, persecution because of their race, their religion, their nationality, membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. And when they're denied that opportunity, we are really violating our fundamental principles and also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the severe treatment seems to be against people of color, and we are treating more leniently those who have some kind of a connection with the United States. For example, look at Afghanistan. And I'm not saying that the families from Afghanistan don't deserve to be rescued from the Taliban or resettled in this country, but you might not be aware of this. The entire refugee resettlement program has come to a halt so that we can bring in people who are described as our allies. So people who are from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or refugees from Sudan, are basically being told, hang on, you're going to have to wait longer, as though waiting the 4 years during the Trump administration wasn't long enough. You're going to have to wait longer because we're bringing in people who were allies of the United States during its 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. We could probably do both as a country with so many resources. Welcome Afghan refugees, and at the same time, keep up the resettlement of refugees from Africa. I mean, over the past 20 years, about 35% of the refugees coming to the United States came from African countries. It's gone up and down a bit, and it was definitely down during the Trump administration. But there has been a fairly good balance, geographical balance, in the US government refugee resettlement program. It could be better. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the number of refugees coming to this country and the countries that they come from should not be left to the president to decide. It's called the presidential determination. It happens once a year, and it's supposed to be a decision that is taken in consultation with the State Department and Congress, but it usually isn't. But I would say that it is too important a decision to be left to just an administration I think it should have, I think Congress should really play a much greater role in deciding how many refugees we resettle and the makeup of that annual group of refugees.
I appreciate you saying that, Chris. I've often wondered, how does that work? Because, an administration comes in and they say, well, the number or the allotment or the quota, whatever the correct term is 60,000 refugees we're going to allow in this year. And then, next time you hear, oh no, we're only going to do, whatever it is, 25 or 30,000, right? And then so I was like, well, excuse me, the number of people in need of being rescued, I like that word,
Right.
hasn't gone down, yet there's a determination that, oh no, we're going to reduce the number to a lower number. And I also appreciate what you said about the Afghani evacuees, and because and I haven't said this publicly. I know it's probably controversial. That hasn't stopped me before, so why should it stop me now? But I've been thinking, wait a minute. It seems like we are treating the Afghani, refugees, evacuees, differently from. I appreciate you mentioning my beloved Democratic Republic of Congo. You know, what's the difference? What's
Yeah.
the difference there? What is it that the Afghanis who deserve, as you said, every opportunity to be rescued from the Taliban and that insidious regime and what's happening there? But what about the folks from Honduras? What about the Guatemalans? What about the Venezuelans? What about, so thank you for clarifying some of that. So I'm going to bring you back in, Helen, because I know you are intimately involved and passionately involved right now in Falmouth with trying to prepare for the welcoming of evacuees from Afghanistan. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the work you are doing and comment, if you would, on what Chris and I were just discussing.
First of all, there's not a word that came out of Chris's mouth that I have anything but affirmation of. It's right on. And I would also like to briefly comment, there's a category of refugee status that this country has upheld, certainly in the previous to the prior administration, that refugees, yes, they need to be rescued, and they need to be rescued from life-threatening things. And one of those things, and there were a couple of African countries, including Kenya, and Obama made a point about this several times. Kenya would allow people to be stoned to death by nature of being gay. This was also true in Uganda. And we have many refugees. Refugee status can be given to people who are LGBT, providing their life is threatened in their home country. And refugee status always means you're giving up your home country. This isn't a temporary vacation till things get better. They're letting go and giving up and being resettled here. And part of the work that I have done in the past few years, as I first was an executive level program director, and the past 5 years, I've been in intensive medical case management of people who've had particular medical or psychological trauma. And so that's been a huge percentage of the folks I've worked with. And this is a very real trauma, and this is happening in African countries. And these people are no less at risk while they wait. And they've been waiting, yes, 4 years. And I think the refugee resettlement programs are in an incredible state of A, relief right now that someone's coming, and B, total exhaustion because they're coming in astronomical numbers on very short notice. I spent weekend before last back in Syracuse setting up an apartment for an Afghan family of 9, because the program I used to work with there was receiving 27 people one day and 42 people the next, with about less than 48 hours prior notice. and they were meeting that need, but they're exhausted. And I'm sure Chris is going to allude to that. Also in Connecticut, people are exhausted because this is happening so fast. And yet we've all sat and worried and wondered and prayed and done less other polite things with our language about the people that were in so much danger in so many places in Africa for so many reasons that were not being allowed to come. And I say Africa because there are a lot of problems there. There are a lot of good things going on in Africa, but the Congo, the gender-based issues in several countries, and all that's been going on in Tigray, Ethiopia, and there just are a lot of real challenges. These people need our help. These people need our help, and we have been giving it so well for so long. So. As far as the Afghan situation, yes, these people need our help too. And what's happening to them is pretty doggone brutal. We all know that the Taliban are not nice people with nice manners. And I'm totally in support of that project going forward. I'm willing to give all the time and strength and energy and skills I have to make that happen. I know our little community of Falmouth here is saying we're ready to receive 3 families. And I strongly suspect we'd be ready to receive more if we had that opportunity. And opportunities are being created for this particular population. But we need to be able to do the highest and best work we used to do as a country. And I think something's missing, and it's not just in refugee resettlement, but refugee resettlement is a great way to get a close portrait of something that's amiss, that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, you both Chris and you have mentioned this. We in the United States, we have the capacity to do much more. We have the capacity, I believe, to take in as many individuals and families that are in need of safe harbor, safe haven. We've got vast swatches of this country that are open, that are undeveloped. We've got hotels and shopping malls and things that are in deplorable conditions, going back to the recession of the late 80s, right, that never rebounded. What if we used our American ingenuity in creating homes in these dilapidated hotels and motels and other structures that are out of commission now. So I think we have the capacity. One of our sons, our youngest son, called me just last week, and he saw a news report about, and I think I don't know if it was in Sudan or Ethiopia or where it was, that members of the LGBTQIA community were being brutalized and were being murdered. Yes. Because of their status, their gender, identity. And he was like, "Dad, did you know about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing happens." And I told him about Uganda as a major violator of that. And I just share one other thing, but I want to hear what Chris has to say. I got a text just this morning. I thought about, maybe it's because I knew we were going to be doing this show today. I thought about a young lady in Buffalo, New York, where my wife and I were before coming to Falmouth 3 years ago, and she was and her daughter from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Ronnie, my spouse, and I have had a chance to visit Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, and just fell in love with the people there, and also became educated around just how horrible the conditions are. People don't know how bad it is in DRC. People have no idea how poor that country is, how war-torn it is, how rape is used as a weapon of war there, how many millions of people have been killed during the war. Anyway, so I sent her a text this morning, just said, "Hey, I'm thinking about you. I want to know how Linda, your daughter, and you are doing." And she wrote me back, and I'm going to just ask you to indulge me just for a second. She said, "Reverend, Linda and I are doing fine. Linda is a freshman at Canisius. She is living there. I am at my last semester to obtain a bachelor in international business, also at Canisius. I'm working at a bank near the church where you used to lead, and I'm working as a professional intern. Since by the grace of God, I will be confirmed as a full-time employee after January. And so that just reminded me, again, the previous administration just painted this horrific image of the people that were coming. They were called murderers and rapists and what have you. And could you both just speak for a moment to, you know, that what happens when people are given a chance, like my DRC refugee friends here? What happens, and how they can become um, leaders in our community, contributing members of our society? I hope you understand what I'm trying to ask you. Chris, you want to offer, or Helen, whichever one of you would like to respond.
Well, I just welcomed 16 people last night at about 1:30 a.m. I don't know why they're coming in so late, but we had 4 case managers there. I was there to just help out. After 1 a.m. at the office, 4 families from Afghanistan. They had spent about 2 months on military bases in Texas. But over the 16 years, I've welcomed hundreds of refugees who have come from all over the place. Sudan, Congo, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, Cuba, Colombia. And now we're also working with undocumented immigrants, asylum seekers from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. These are tough, resourceful, creative, strong, determined people. They want nothing more than to regain some control over their lives, because for too long they've been pushed around and persecuted and told to go there. You can't cross this checkpoint. Guns pointed at them. Family members killed in front of them. And then out of desperation, fleeing their home country. I mean, it's an experience that none of us can imagine. And they come to this country and they want to hit the ground running, get jobs as soon as possible. Many of them were accomplished, successful, highly respected individuals in their home countries, in towns and cities. And they come to the United States, and because they don't speak English, they're unable to move into that profession that they were used to, and they often usually have to accept a job that is several rungs below on the ladder. And it's a tough pill to swallow, but they do it. They do it, and they will study during the hours they're not working and learn English and get promoted, move into other jobs. Before you know it, they're opening businesses. The majority of new businesses opened in this country are opened by immigrants. And, these are real success stories. And they're just amazing people. For too long, refugee agencies like mine, and I'll maybe give a real quick overview of the refugee resettlement structure in this country. There are about 200 refugee resettlement nonprofit groups all across the country, California to Connecticut. And we have been at it for about 40 years, welcoming refugees, connecting them to healthcare. First, we find housing, and we'll enroll the kids in school, help them learn English, help them get jobs. And we've really focused on the services. We've done a pretty good job over these 40 years, Will, of providing the services. And you probably remember that from your time at IRIS 16 years ago. But we have not done a good job. In fact, I think the refugee resettlement organizations have done a pretty poor job of educating Americans about refugees and about refugee resettlement, the global refugee crisis. And who better than a refugee resettlement agency can do that? We've also done a very poor job of engaging Americans in this incredible work. I mean, welcoming a family from another country and helping them start a new life, it's too important to be monopolized by small groups of nonprofit staff, maybe with a few volunteers helping out. We should be swinging open our doors and allowing thousands of Americans to come in and work with us. And we should be placing refugee families not all together in clusters in cities where our offices are, but we should be placing refugee families far away from the cities with community groups, spreading them all over so that Americans can have this experience of getting to know refugees. And so the next time someone running for public office stands up on a podium, on a stage, at a podium, and starts spewing this hatred and nonsense, vilifying and blaming refugees for all of our problems, the next time that happens, that person will be shouted down because people in the audience will say, wait a minute, I gave a job to a refugee. I helped a refugee learn English. I walked some kids to school. My kids go to a school with refugees. That's nonsense what that guy is saying. Refugees are tough, hardworking people. They've come to this country for all the right reasons. They appreciate everything that this country has to offer, sometimes even more than Americans who were born here. So that's what we need to do. We need to engage the American public in this work in a much more expansive way, so they're educated about the program and to build public support, because that public support will translate into political support, and we need that support if this program is going to be sustained over the years.
Oh, Chris, I'm so grateful that you are doing this work, and that I told Iris they should hire you. I just got to say that. You know? Helen, I know you have lots of stories about relationships that you've had with refugees and how you've seen them blossom. Give us your thoughts.
Well, it's funny you say that because I do have stories. And one of the things I plan to do with this chapter of my life is to write a book of refugee stories. And I already have a title for the book, and I'll share it with you. It's Walking in the River of Life. Because one of my volunteers who spent a week with me once, a corporate executive who came to help do just whatever, said, it's been such a treat to walk with you in the river of life. But I'm going to share with you two brief stories about just two refugees. These two happen to be women. I've got lots of stories about the guys. One of these women was from the war-torn conflict area between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And her mom was Ethiopian and her dad was Eritrean. And that's a terribly conflicted war. You mentioned, Will, that people use rape as a tool of war. This young woman was raped and sodomized in front of her father intentionally to traumatize him and her. And she arrived in this country with so much pessimism in her little dossier and so much need for mental health services and such poor expectations for what her outcome might be. Fast forward to this year during COVID, she is now living in Houston, Texas. She owns a Medicaid cab. She drives COVID patients all over the place. And she contacts me about every 2 weeks just to make sure I'm okay. And I called her one day and said, and I will not mention names because that's one of the things refugee resettlement folks get nervous about, because sometimes if names slip out and get to the home country, horrible things happen to remaining relatives. But I said to her, do you have enough water? And she laughed and she said, Mama Helen, I'm a refugee. I have 80 cases of water bottles in my closet just in case. The other one, who will visit me very soon, by the way, in Falmouth, Father Will. She arrived in this country from the Congo, a single mom with a very, very disabled child, primarily because of lack of good prenatal care and delivery care. The child had hydrocephaly. The child has a magnificent name, which I'll share with Father Will one day. And a mom arrived here with this disabled little child on her back about 5 years ago. And mom had her own feet blown off by a bomb when she was 3 years old. So she has no feet. So here we have a disabled mother with a disabled child. And oh, by the way, yes, that child was the product of a rape, which is a very, very private thing that was only shared with me recently. So how are they doing now? That mama with her prosthetic feet, and by the way, she can carry a case of 40 water bottles on her head without needing to balance it, except occasionally with 2 fingers. She works in a long-term care facility as a personal care attendant for the elderly. She gets so much joy and so much love out of caring for these people in so much need. And yeah, she's gotten a driver's license because she's kind of tired of taking the bus at all kinds of hours. But she's working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Fortunately, she's found a wonderful caregiver for her child who happens to be a refugee from another country that really loves kids. And with the good medical care that the child is getting in this country, we have discovered that this child who cannot speak and cannot see, can hear, loves music, and probably has a lot more intelligence than we ever gave her credit for. And after a couple of surgeries, is beginning to be able to stand, and perhaps one day will walk. Yeah, they're real takers.
Well, I will look forward to meeting this incredible person and welcoming her during her visit with you in Falmouth. Well, I think let's transition for a moment and go back to our people on the street. And
Yes.
we've been talking about the inequity in our immigration system, the racism that exists there, and all the challenges around that. And we asked our people on the street, how do we make our immigration system more equitable? How do we do that? And I'm going to ask Chris and Helen to respond to that as well when we come back.
Well, I mean, what we need is a comprehensive immigration policy. And frankly, and this is as I said to you before we taped this, as a recovering politician, it just boggles my mind that an issue that Ted Kennedy and George W. Bush can agree on still is not policy. And I would say shame on Congress for not having hammered out something at this point. I can remember when I was doing this kind of work professionally, it was not a partisan issue. In fact, our biggest advocate when we needed help on refugee issues was Gordon Humphreys, an ultra-conservative senator from the state of Maine. It was not Republicans against, Democrats for. I think, unfortunately, there's been some sides drawn up in this whole thing, and partisanship and kind of protecting power has made coming to a transparent, fair policy much more difficult to get to.
By building a well-functioning legal immigration system that can be responsive to the nation's changing needs, this will include realistic and independent evidence-based avenues for immigration that allow families to stay together and businesses to get the workers they need, while enhancing all workers' right to fair and increasing wages, safe working conditions, and the opportunity to thrive together. The second is by putting an end to the immigration and customs enforcement detention machine. Over the past several decades, immigration detention, in essence, incarcerating those awaiting a determination of their immigration status or potential deportation, has become our nation's newest system of mass incarceration of Black and Brown people. Incarceration of immigrants used to be the exception, not the rule. Under the law, we aren't supposed to incarcerate people to punish them for lacking immigration status, that is a civil matter, or to deter others from coming to the United States. But that's precisely what we do now and on a massive scale. The third one is by committing to proportionality, accountability, and due process in immigration enforcement. This will do with the current one-size-fits-all approach in which deportation from the country is the only sanction on the table and opportunities for relief are few, and instead allow for a range of potential penalties to fit the offense and the individual. And finally, by creating a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and other individuals long residing in the country. This will help the more than 1 million individuals now protected by the Fair Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA as we know it, temporary protected status, TPS, or the Fair Enforcement Forced Departure, or also known in immigration law as DED, who have no path to permanent residence and are living in fear that their temporary reprieve may soon be ripped away. If our collective goal is to create policy that upholds the rule of law in the United States immigration system, there can be no question that the nation must provide a path to permanent legal status for those already here. They are all full and contributing members of our US communities, raising families, paying taxes, and enriching society in many ways.
Well, thanks for staying with us, folks. We hope you're getting as much out of this conversation as Angie and I are. I'm grateful for you tuning in to the conversation here on FCTV. Our guests, again, are Chris George, the Executive Director of Integrated Refugee and Immigration Services in Connecticut, and Helen Malina, a person with a clinical psychology background who's done a great deal of work for many years working with refugees individually and also as an executive and manager with refugee programs. So the question we just heard some responses to is, how do we make our immigration system more equitable? You know, Chris, you were pounding away with some of the ills in our system, and Helen was in your amen corner. So
Yeah.
I'll toss it to you, Chris. What can we do? What can be done to make it more equitable?
So maybe I'll pick up where I left off. I think that if the American public is more aware of what's going on and involved in helping immigrants and refugees, and we sort of build that, from the bottom up, grassroots public understanding, sympathy, compassion. I'm hopeful that the more people know about refugees and other immigrants, the more they will support them. I think I have to believe that. That's the start, because in our system, people vote for representatives, and if immigration law or the refugee resettlement program is an issue, then they will vote for people who want to reform the immigration program and have a strong refugee resettlement program on top of it. So I would say we have got to get more people involved so that they understand and really develop a human bond and understanding of the refugee experience and what immigrants have gone through to get to this country. And all of the studies show that in places where there are large immigrant populations, the non-immigrants are much more supportive of refugee resettlement and immigration reform and allowing more immigrants into this country. They've had contact with them, they know them, they work with them, they appreciate their work ethic. So that tells us something. Let's get more refugees and immigrants into more parts of this country. And one way that we do it here in Connecticut is we have a model that's called community-based resettlement, whereby we will train community groups and then place a refugee family in that community. That's a map of Connecticut over there. I don't know if you can see it, but there are a lot of red squares all over that state map. And each of those squares represents a community group that has welcomed a refugee. There are over 50 squares. And we're doing that now. And in fact, when somebody comes up to me today or tomorrow in Connecticut and says, how can I help with the Afghan crisis? I say, don't write a check, form a group, form a community group, get trained by Iris, and we will place a family with you. That is the best way to help right now. And of course, if you can't form a group, of course, we'll accept a check, because that allows us to hire staff and do more. But the highest priority is to get these refugees off the military bases and into communities. And that's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see it not just happen in Connecticut, but in Massachusetts and in New Jersey and New York and all across the country.
So it kind of begs the question for me, though, Chris. So refugees have been coming, the programs have been operating for years now, decades now. So why isn't this story better known? Why? I mean, every once in a while you'll see a front page story about a refugee family and how well they're doing and contributing to the community and all. So why isn't it better known? What's not happening that needs to happen?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. And soon after I was hired, and thank you again for voting yes on the committee that decided to hire me. Soon after I was hired, I started asking around, especially at conferences where there were representatives from the State Department. I would say, why isn't this program better known? Why isn't there more material to publicize the program? Why doesn't the State Department encourage the refugee organizations to get out and to engage the community? And every State of the Union address, why doesn't the president point to a refugee up in the balcony and say, and there is a refugee family that has successfully made it in this country? And you know what? The answer was always the same from the people I asked. It was, we think it's better for you to kind of work under the radar, keep a low profile. There's all this immigration feelings and anti-immigrant attitude. And, we just think it's best for you guys to sort of, secretly resettle refugees in the community. And that is so wrong. it was such a mistake, but it's a very, it's difficult for refugee resettlement agencies to kind of get out of that mindset. I mean, when I started at IRIS, my staff treated journalists like they were radioactive. They wouldn't let them in the office. Oh no, you can't come in and do a story on, you know, on our refugees. You know, we have to protect their privacy. And well, of course we have to protect their privacy, but journalists know how to protect people's privacy. Just 2 weeks ago, an NBC television crew came in and filmed the story of an Afghan who was hoping for his family to come from Kabul. And they didn't show his face. They changed his name. I mean, you can tell stories of these people and at the same time protect their privacy and keep them safe. And there is no better way to broadcast this great story of refugee resettlement than to work with the press. So gradually people are beginning to see it. I think it was the election of Donald Trump that was kind of a wake-up call for the refugee organizations that said, oh my God, we've been focusing on services all this time, sort of with our head to the ground, without realizing that we need the support of the public. And the best way to get the support of the public is to engage the public. So, you know, Will, you're right. It was a missed opportunity for 30, 35 years. But now we're beginning to realize, all the refugee organizations, is that we need to, you know, swing open our doors, let people in, engage more Americans, and really get the word out, because it's an amazing story.
So that kind of reminds me of the affordable housing issue, in that it's become a loaded term. And so trying to educate people on what it actually means. So I feel like it's obviously not the same, but it goes along the same lines of when people feel or think a certain way about something for so long, trying to get people to change their mindset is very difficult and requires a lot of work. One thing I'm wondering about, when you work with these evacuees, these refugees who are coming here, and you put them in communities, how do you ensure that they're being put into welcoming communities? I can imagine that it would be difficult for someone who comes from like the DRC coming to Falmouth. It was a culture shock for me, and I had been used to being the only Black person in the room for a really long time. So when we talk about being equitable in our immigration policy, I also think about that in terms of bringing people here. It's one thing to be equal among everyone, but to be equitable means to treat people differently in a way that makes sense. So how is that built into the work that you all do?
Well, I've talked a lot. Helen, you want to take this one?
Sure.
And maybe, Helen, you could talk specifically about what we're doing in Falmouth as well, to know.
Yeah. And I'm going to share a little story from one of my refugees, specifically about his encounter with Falmouth, because there is some work that needs to be done. One of the refugees that was here visiting with me once, who was extremely talented, educated, brilliant young man, who is from one of the countries where his life was threatened because of his gender preference. And he's been in this country a while, and he came here as my guest, and he went to one of our local stores. And he commented to me at dinner afterwards. He said, you know, I experienced something for the first time in my life today that I'd heard about, but had never seen. He said, we went into a retail store and we all separated and went our own way. And a lady who worked there followed him within 8 feet of him, watching everything he did. He said, I felt like I was being observed because of my color. He said, that's never happened to me before. And I found that interesting. So yes, there is work to be done. And I'm a tremendous advocate for volunteers. I believe they do incredible work with refugees. And I will also say it takes a lot of time and a lot of specifics to train them carefully, because the business about the privacy for refugees is real and it is important. And with the internet and all sorts of things, there was a family member of someone in Syracuse who was seen in a publicized view of a World Refugee Day parade, and they were in the front line of the parade. And I believe it was a grandmother was killed in the home country. So that stuff is important. But, you know, refugee resettlement isn't rocket science. Chris and I are nice people, but we're not geniuses. And there are a tremendous number of caring, giving people in our communities who can be trained about that piece and trained about a lot of other pieces. But the way you fit a refugee into the community is not assimilate them, make them like one of us, integrate them, help them meet people, help people know them, get them involved with things. And for a while you walk beside them. And then before you know it, you're going to be walking behind them because they're going to be way ahead of you. They're going to take the ball and run with it. And so will the community. But you know, we have a lot of talented people in this country. I'm going to name a corporation just because. There was a guy that was resettled in New York State who founded a little yogurt company called Chobani. They're one of the biggest philanthropic donors in the state of New York. And, you know, the dairy industry is pretty grateful to them there because contrary to beliefs about New York being that city down in the lower part that has lots of urban stuff, New York has a lot of apples, wine, and dairy cows. And then there's a couple cities here and there. But, you know, it just really takes the time to get to know folks. And that's all. And volunteers can get to know folks and take them places. Go to the laundromat with them. Go to the grocery store with them. And I've had some volunteers tell me about some conversations they have had and the things they have learned sitting watching the clothes wash down at the local laundromat with a refugee family that the staff didn't have time to train about the laundry, but the volunteers did. We need to get the communities activated, involved, and trained.
And along with that, sadly, we also have to explain to refugees, Black refugees, refugees of color, that they are going to encounter racism in this country. You know, they're not going to be kidnapped. They're not going to be thrown in prison and tortured. They're not going to have to dodge roadside bombs or snipers, but it's not going to be a walk in the park. And we have an obligation as the Refugee Resettlement Agency, and a community group also has the obligation to explain to refugees from Congo or from Afghanistan, anywhere else, is, you know, you're going to encounter some discrimination, some prejudice, stereotyping, racism, and it's really ugly. It's going to make you feel terrible. But this is how you might want to deal with it. In fact, we actually did a little role play at some point during our cultural orientation programs when there seemed to be kind of an outbreak of anti-immigrant sentiment after the election of Trump in the New Haven area. You know, what do you do when someone yells at you on the street or on a bus? So we have to do a better job, I think, of preparing refugees for the kind of racism and ugliness that they're going to inevitably encounter in this country. All the more reason why they need friends, and not just case managers or
Absolutely.
job developers,
Absolutely.
but a group of friends in a community who will explain these things to them and stand up for them when bad things happen.
And walk beside them.
Yeah, viewers of this program know that I often say we need more people to be accomplices and fewer allies. And you're right. We need people to walk beside and to be willing to intervene on behalf of and advocate for, and not just stand on the sidelines to cheer. Although we need that as well. Yeah, the racism is real. Again, people that viewed the conversation have heard stories I've shared about the racism I've experienced here in Falmouth, from walking into a store or a restaurant right here on our beloved Main Street and being followed and all. It's real, and there's there's an operation, a company here in town that has a number of folks, people of color, working in their establishment, and their their own. I don't know if I have to be coy about this, but Bill Zammer, who along with his wife Linda own the Flying Bridge restaurant here, they bring in a number of individuals on visas from I think it's Jamaica, Angela, if I remember correctly. And I was talking to Bill before he died, may he rest in peace, about my experience as a black person, and he said, I want you to come and talk to my staff. I've got these guys and gals from Jamaica, and they don't understand it. They don't get it, right? Because they don't have to experience that in their home countries. And
Right.
sadly, I never got a chance to follow up with Bill and to do that. Chris, you said encouraging people not necessarily to write a check, but to form groups. I know, Helen, you're part of a group that's done that, that is in the midst of doing that work. And NST, which I think is a neighborhood support team.
Yep.
So I wish you well in that work. And Chris, I will say to you, our youngest son had, I don't think, ever given money to a charity. And then I think it was last Christmas, he called me and he said, you know what, I want to give money to a charity this year. And I think I want to give money to Iris. And so he sent you a donation, and because he had a chance to experience the good work that you all do there. So thank you. Keep it up, Helen, Chris. Thank you for your time. Angie, always good to share this space with you. Grateful to our viewers. Continue to tune in to the conversation, and grateful for the support of FCTV. Until we have a chance to engage in more conversation, be well.